This is Mistborn Era 2, the second Mistborn series by the legendary author Brandon Sanderson. Now, I have reviewed his first three books on the channel, The Final Empire, The Well of Ascension, and the other one, The Hero of Ages. That's what it is, The Hero of Ages. So I've read those three books, and I reviewed them, so I thought, well, I better review the second era, because I just finished it a few days ago. I don't want to go through each book individually, because I feel my thoughts will cross over, because my opinions on these books are mostly one and all. They don't differ too much from book to book. Yes, I like some books more than others, but I feel like I can just talk about them as a series more. Especially way more than the original trilogy, seeing as these books each are about half the size of the original trilogy books, especially the first one, Alloy of Law, which is, I want to say, it's just 300 pages. The first Mistborn book is, I think, around 600, 700 pages. So that's the difference we got here. The books that we have here are The Alloy of Law, Shadows of Self, and The Bands of Mourning. There will be a fourth book coming out next year called The Lost Metal, and Sanderson has just begun writing that, which means we should get it pretty quickly, because he is a quick, very, very quick writer compared to everyone else in the industry. The Mistborn story is going to be split up into several series that each cover different points in the history of the world with the technological advancement over time. When Sanderson was getting back into the mood to write Mistborn, the second series, well, he decided to write a few short stories, or novellas, and they evolved into a full series as happens, and that's how we have the second era Mistborn books. They are set in an industrial revolution / Wild West setting. They are much more lighthearted with lower stakes than the original trilogy, but there's still a lot of good stuff to be found here. So let's dive right into it. Talk about Alloy of Law first. So the thing about Alloy of Law is I did not love it when I read it, and it probably is still my least favourite Sanderson book that I have read. Keep in mind, I've only read the Cosmere books and the Skyward series. But in terms of the ones that I have read, this is my least favourite. Why? The characters weren't connecting to me at first, and the plot just seemed such a small scale compared to all his other series. It's not necessarily a bad book, and I did enjoy it, but my favourite parts of it were references to the original trilogy, which is a problem. I should like it in its own right. It does a good job of setting up the world though, and as a basis, the characters are okay. I liked this book, but I did not love it. At least the pacing was quite quick though. I got through it quite quickly because while it's not my favourite book ever, it is certainly a very digestible book. A character that I really did not love was Wayne. Sanderson likes to create very out there characters that are quite bizarre, and Wayne is probably my least favourite of them. In Stormlight you have characters like Lopen and Lift. Wayne, I don't love him. He can be used as good comic relief, and I do really like his banter with Waxillium, the main protagonist of the story, but there are other parts of Wayne, particularly in just the very nonchalant way that he treats women, and also just his weird quirks that just don't come off well for me. I can see why you might enjoy the character, but for me, he's just quite annoying. Waxillium, on the other hand, is quite a good character. I do like Wax, but he is very run-of-the-mill. Compared to a character like Kaladin, he is just very dull. He doesn't have a lot going for him in terms of complexity and depth, at least in this book. I stress, in this book, I do like the others more. And then the other main character is Maisie, and her whole thing in this book is that she has a thing for Wax, and she is very enamored by him because he's a bit of a legend. And look, she's okay, but she lacks complexity. All the characters lack the complexity of other Sanderson works. I do really like the character Steris though, and was disappointed that she is basically not in this book at all. One thing that I will say about the book that I did really enjoy was the advancement in technology and how that applied to the magic system. The magic system in this book, the advancement of the original trilogy, and what happens when you start adding a Mistborn with guns and such, that is really cool. I won't go into the magic system because if you want to see that, go and watch my previous videos on Mistborn, but I did really enjoy that part of the book. That was exceptional. Other than that though, I did not love it and was not super excited to continue on, though I did, and thank goodness I did. Because Shadows of Self is a big improvement. I know some people, like Mike's Book Reviews, he's a YouTuber, doesn't like this book very much. It's their least favourite book of the entire series. I really like Shadows of Self. Most of the book takes place in one day, and it is this big political thriller story about a very unstable city on the brink of chaos, and there are people trying to undermine everything, and the governor is corrupt and freaking out, and there is just so much really juicy political drama in this book. The characters were also much improved. I didn't love Wayne, but he was slightly better than the first book. He had a little bit more depth with some of his character. Wax, I found Wax to be a much more compelling character with his connection to the character Lessie. That was really good in this book, and ultimately it was just a much stronger, more concise read than the first one. Yes, this book isn't going to be end-of-the-world epic fantasy stuff like the first series, but in terms of what it is, I felt that Shadows of Self did it really well, and funnily enough, The Well of Ascension, the second original Mistborn book, which is also quite political, is also my favourite. This is my favourite in the second trilogy. So while this book isn't going to blow anyone's socks off enormously, it is quite good and it has a few really nice twists and turns. It's also just much more concise than the first one. It's less flailing and the characters are more engaging. Now, finally, I'm going to get to the third book, and really, not my favourite, but objectively, if you just want to talk about what happens in it, this is the best book. The characters go to places they have never been before. They all grow immensely. The character Wayne, who I do not like until this book, goes through quite a dramatic change. He gets over this girl that he likes that turns out to be a lesbian that he knew before, but he just didn't care, which I felt was quite obnoxious. He gets over that. He actually does a lot of really interesting stuff, and you get more of an insight into his mind and find that he's actually quite a compassionate character. Yes, his quirks can still be annoying, but some of those quirks actually end up saving the day in the end, and he becomes a much better character. Waxilium's depth that he gained in the last book continues here. The character Maisie, while she didn't do a whole lot in this book herself, there is a lot of setup for her in this book that I hope in the fourth one will propel her to be an amazing character. She makes a few decisions in this book about her future that I am optimistic about. One of my favourite characters, Steris, who Brando Sando has actually said is on the spectrum, she gets a lot more to do in this book, and you learn a lot more about her, and her and Waxilium's relationship starts to really mean something. It's just a much more solid book. The villains are clearly outlined, they seem menacing this time, the world expands. In this book, which funnily enough actually has a lot of connections to the original Mistborn trilogy, I did feel that the series was finally coming into its own and really being its own thing. But not only that, but was able to be its own thing and be capable. Alloy of Law was certainly quite different, but it wasn't out of the original trilogy's shadow. This one really is. And although there are a lot of original trilogy characters in this book, it manages to step out into the spotlight more than any of the previous ones. The one big complaint that I will have with this book is that the pacing is very disjointed. Unlike the second book, which was all in one night and was very much, this is the story, this book almost feels like in three different genres. Some of it is political thriller, some of it is Wild Western adventure, some of it is an adventure story, some of it is romance, and while they do all work together eventually, it does feel very disjointed at parts. A lot like, and this was a book that came out around the same time, Mistborn's Secret History. And speaking of Mistborn's Secret History, if you have not read that, I would recommend you read this first, because there is a big reveal at the end of this book that goes straight into Mistborn's Secret History. So I would read this first. If I just had to recommend Alloy of Law, I will have said, unless you really like Wild West type stories, and you really like light-hearted banter, and you really are a Mistborn fan, I wouldn't overly recommend it. But when you take all 3 books into account, it is quite a good trilogy. So far, not as good as the first Mistborn because there is a range in quality, but it is still a good collection of books, and if Wax and Wayne 4, The Lost Metal, can tie everything together really well and really get those characters up to great heights, well, this series might end much better than I would have thought of if I just read The Alloy of Law. Well, that is my review for Mistborn Era 2. What did you guys think of it? I was pretty critical on especially Alloy of Law. It's the most critical I've ever been of a Sanderson book. I did like it, I want to stress that, but I didn't love it. And when you got a Sanderson book that you don't love, something's wrong there. It just wasn't for me. And looking around the internet, most people seem to give it 3 to 4 stars. So the general consensus is that it's pretty good, but it's not amazing. And I think that sounds about right. But if you enjoy it, do not let me take that away from you. If you enjoy it, that is perfectly fine, and good on you, more power to you. Regardless, I have a video about The Name of the Wind coming up very soon, so stick around for that. I hope you all have a fantastic day. My name is Jasper, and I'll see you all later. Bye bye.